Hello, fellow celiacs. In this episode, we're going to cover the basics of what you can and can't eat now that you've been diagnosed with celiac disease. Unfortunately, it's not as simple as figuring out what gluten is and then cutting that out of your diet. Gluten is not always where you'd expect to find it. You probably don't realize it, but it's been hiding out in a lot of your favorite foods this whole time. First of all, let's get this important bit out of the way. Gluten is the protein found in wheat, barley, and rye. This is going to be your mantra. Anything containing those grains as flours or whole grains, and even a tiny amount, and I'm talking about molecular here. Yes, even trace amounts are bad for you. Now the obvious things to avoid are going to be your bread, pasta, pizza, beer, flour tortillas, crackers, pretzels, cookies, muffins, cakes, stuff like that. Just take a second to breathe all that in. Now there are also plenty of products where gluten is not the main ingredient, but it is still present, as well as products that contain gluten in trace amounts. Ingredients like modified food starch can come from wheat. Malt vinegar is made with barley. Gravies and sauces all typically have wheat flour in them as a thickener. Soy sauce is not just soybeans, it actually contains about 40% wheat. Now, it's quite useful to have a list of these ingredients on hand, so I've linked to such a list on the Celiac Disease Foundation's website in the description, so you can look it over and get familiar. Before we even get into talking about gluten-free alternatives for these foods, and yes, they exist, and they are so much better than you've been led to believe by pop culture, I want to point out the one thing that is easy to overlook in all this overwhelming talk about what you can't eat anymore. There are plenty of things out there that are not gluten. In fact, most things aren't gluten. Whole foods like fruits, vegetables, meats, beans, dairy, cheese, they're all naturally gluten-free and thus safe for you to eat. There's a whole host of grains that are naturally gluten-free like quinoa, different kinds of rice, millet, amaranth, and even buckwheat. Yes, don't be scared of buckwheat just because it has the word wheat in it. It is not a gluten-containing grain. Now, it is important to point out, though, that with anything that is naturally gluten-free, cross-contamination can and does happen during the manufacturing process. The biggest and most obvious example of this is oats. Oats are not a gluten grain either, but they do come into contact with wheat so often during harvest, processing, and packaging that they are pretty much guaranteed to be covered in gluten, unless you buy oats labeled gluten-free. Thankfully, gluten-free oats are a thing. Don't worry, I'm going to do an entire episode on oats. So anyway, the point is you're not going to go hungry. You're just going to have to adapt. And if you already eat a balanced diet, it's going to be a lot easier for you. Now, if you're a junk food fanatic or you just never cook, and let's face it, that's some of us and that's okay, you're going to have to be hyper aware of the foods you choose. You're going to have to read some labels. Lucky for you, most labels are fairly easy to decipher once you know what to look for. You can start by familiarizing yourself with that list of added ingredients that are known to contain gluten. You don't necessarily want to trust a label that says gluten-free on it outright. Companies make mistakes, labels change, and also, gluten-free is so loosely defined sometimes that it pays to look closely. I'll show you what I mean. Some companies are voluntarily adding disclaimers that can simultaneously be helpful and confusing. You may see all of the allergens contained in a product listed in bold after the ingredient list. Unfortunately, this is not universal or even regulated all that well. I've seen products where they missed indicating an allergen in bold when it was clearly present on the ingredient list. You might see statements like may contain wheat, or processed in a shared facility with wheat, or processed on shared equipment with wheat. You might see other products labeled gluten-free, but with a closer look at the ingredient list, you may see one or more of these disclaimers. You should always avoid products that are ambiguous like this. To me, may contain wheat means does contain wheat. The chance is just too high that they are going to contain traces of gluten. Remember that these statements do not constitute a declaration of parts per million, or anything definitive really. So how's a person to know what to make of all this? Thankfully, there are a handful of gluten-free certifications out there. The certified GF logo that you see most commonly denotes that a product has passed rigorous testing and cannot contain more than 10 parts per million of gluten. I've linked to an article on the Gluten Intolerance Group's website that lays out their standards for obtaining the certification. I've also linked to a few other organizations that have gluten-free certifications because they all have different testing requirements. Now, there are plenty of products out there that don't have any kind of certification at all, but they're still perfectly safe for you to eat. You just have to use your judgment and steer clear of anything you're unsure of. To sum up, when checking products, look for some kind of certified GF logo. If you don't see it, but you do see the words gluten-free, scan the back to see if there are any allergen warnings or ingredients that you know contain gluten. If you see something fishy, or if it says anything like processed with wheat or may contain wheat, put it back and keep searching. At the beginning, when you're first getting started, you may even want to stick with products that have a certified logo just to give your system time to recover before you take any risks with products that are not certified. Don't worry, there are plenty of certified GF products out there. If you want some more peace of mind though when making these choices, there's a company called Gluten-Free Watchdog. These guys test products that are labeled gluten-free and make their results available to their subscribers. They also frequently hold the FDA accountable for not enforcing their labeling rules. It's seriously awesome to have a company like this looking out for us. I've linked to them in the description below. So what about products with no labels, like those that are in open bulk bins? Sadly, anything in these bins is subject to cross-contamination with gluten. Whether it's a gluten-free flour or anything else that is considered naturally gluten-free, it can always come in contact with gluten from any of the other bins. Some grocery stores will even put an allergen warning label directly on the bins, which may say something along the lines of "not guaranteed allergen-free." My advice is to completely avoid open bulk bins, even if what you're buying from them is something naturally gluten-free. Even if the bin you're getting it from is 10 feet away from the flours. There's just no way to know that someone hasn't spilled a little dusting of flour on your lentils, and you'd never know it until you got sick from it. Don't risk it. So that's a lot to digest. Pun intended, sorry. Just remember that whole foods are your friends, and go ahead and scan the list of non-gluten containing grains and try something new. Aim for things that are packaged versus open bulk bins. Search for products with some kind of certified GF logo, and scan everything for ingredients that contain gluten or allergens in bold on the ingredient list. And most importantly, look at everything you're buying. Don't just assume something is safe. And even after you've found products that you know are safe, still periodically check the labels. Occasionally, companies change their formulas, and you never know when someone is going to accidentally stock the non-gluten-free version of something by the wrong shelf label. So be wary. Finally, if you're totally overwhelmed by all this, go see a nutritionist that specializes in celiac disease. They can get you started with updated advice on how to totally overhaul your pantry and reset your diet. So there you have it. Now you're well equipped to restock your pantry with foods that won't make you sick. If you found this video helpful, give it a like. If you have any questions for me, please leave them in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe and keep an eye out for my next video. And remember, there is life after gluten. Hey guys, I'm back with a little addendum to that video because I have some resources that I forgot to tell you about. This book right here, Celiac Disease, A Hidden Epidemic, this is a fantastic book. It tells you all about celiac disease, all about the different pathologies and all the different things that can happen to you when you have it, and all about what's going on inside your body. It is one of the definitive tomes on celiac disease. It's written by Peter Green at the Celiac Center at Columbia University. There's tons of advice in this book, and it's highly illuminating. I suggest you get it and read it out loud to your family. Well, maybe don't do that, but definitely get your hands on it any way you can. They will probably give you a copy of this book as a first-time patient, along with this, which is their ultimate guide to gluten-free living. This thing is freaking amazing. Get one and keep it on you at all times. Inside, you can find basically all the information I tell you in these videos. There's even a section on travel tips. I'm going to put some links in the description to where you can find these resources online if you're not in New York City and you don't have access to the Celiac Disease Center. So anyway, two good resources. And I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and please stay tuned for the rest of my videos. I'm going to have some awesome stuff up here, so like and subscribe. And remember, there is life after gluten. I know, I already said it, but bears repeating a lot.